you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. We've an exclusive interview with Andrew Rosindell MP, where he shares his views on the country and monarchy. Also, I'll be speaking to Christine, the Liberal Democrat, on the cost of living, and the Press Association chief political photographer Stefan Russo on picturing our Prime Ministers. First is the news with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A red weather warning has been issued for South Wales and South East England ahead of Storm Eunice, which is due to hit the UK in the early hours of tomorrow morning. The Met Office says there's a danger to life and expects further travel disruption and power cuts. That as thousands of homes in parts of northern England and Scotland are still without power after Storm Dudley hit the UK with 80 miles per hour winds last night. Jim Dale, a senior meteorologist at British Weather Services, has been stressing the dangers of this next storm.
You don't need to travel tomorrow, then don't. We're even saying if schools need to close, think they should close. Better to be safe than sorry, because this is really going to ravage the country through the daytime. Take yourself out of harm's way. Staying in is probably the best policy.
A sex offender who sparked a major manhunt after escaping from an open prison in Lincolnshire has been arrested. Paul Robson had been on the run since Sunday. He'd been described as a particular danger to women and young children. Lincolnshire police say the 56-year-old is now in custody after he was arrested in the Skegness area earlier this morning. It's been claimed the Ukrainian village has been shelled with heavy weapons by Russian-backed separatists from the occupied territory of Donbass. The Ukrainian foreign minister says a civilian infrastructure has been damaged. The separatists have accused Ukrainian government forces of opening fire on their territory 4 times in the past 24 hours. It comes as Western countries have warned an attack by Russia could happen imminently, although it's not clear if this is an escalation. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says NATO's principle of welcoming new members into the organisation is absolutely clear.
Fundamentally, we remain an open-door organisation. I've made it very clear to the Kremlin that, countries choose NATO. NATO doesn't go around choosing the countries. It is not the case, as President Putin often asserts, that somehow NATO is a sort of country of its own going around looking for countries to join. We have the open-door policy, and then 30 members make that decision.
Almost 15 million people were left waiting for post over the Christmas period. That's according to Citizens Advice. The research shows that 2.5 million people missed important documents, health appointments, or were unable to pay a fine or bills. More than half of those surveyed went a week without their post. A group of charities supporting people with a weakened immune system are calling for COVID testing to remain free of charge. 18 health charities warn that coronavirus still poses a serious risk to some people. They fear that abandoning the measures risks making those with a weakened immune system second-class citizens. It's thought the government's Living with COVID strategy for England, set to be published on Monday, could signal an end to free PCR and lateral flow tests. In a first of its kind, new government guidance will help schools teach complex issues such as racism and homosexuality in an impartial way. The new guidance will include history lessons based on factual information presented in a balanced manner. Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi says it aims to help teachers avoid promoting contested theories as fact. The guidance also aims to make sure that no subject is off limits in the classroom. And the amount of Scottish salmon bought in the UK last year increased by more than 4.5 tonnes, a new report has found. Salmon Scotland shows 63,000 tonnes of the fish were sold in the UK last year. That's a rise of 7.8%. Exports are back at pre-pandemic and pre-Brexit levels. Salmon remains our biggest food export, followed by bread, chocolate and cheese. This is GB News. We'll have more as it happens now. It's back to the briefing with Gloria De Piero.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, we're continuing our tour around the former Red Wall, those long-term Labour seats that went Tory last time. Today we're in West Bromwich East to hear from people there. We'll have a Real Me interview with the Conservative MP Andrew Rosindell, a big backer of Boris Johnson and a lover of the royals. And we speak to the legendary chronicler of Prime Ministers, the Press Association photographer Stefan Russo. He'll talk us through his favourite pictures from his 15-year career. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GBNews. First today, we're back in the Red Wall, hearing from voters and those who didn't vote too. Today, we're in West Bromwich, home to two parliamentary constituencies, both of which voted Tory for the first time in their history in 2019. 2 years on, have the people in West Bromwich changed their mind, or are they planning to stick with the Conservatives? Joining me now is Balvinder Sidhu, our Midlands reporter, who is in the seat of West Bromwich East. Balvinder, hi.
Hi, Gloria. Welcome to West Bromwich on this Thursday lunchtime. Yes, I am in West Bromwich East. I've settled into a shopping centre because of high winds outside.
We have to... Sorry, Balvinder, we're now crossing live to the press conference with the NATO Secretary-General.
Good afternoon. NATO allies continue their strong diplomatic efforts to find a political solution to the serious crisis triggered by Russia's military build-up in and around Ukraine. Despite Moscow's claims, we have seen no sign of withdrawal or de-escalation so far. On the contrary, Russia's build-up appears to continue. We continue to monitor developments very closely. We call on Russia to do what it says and withdraw its forces from the borders of Ukraine. This will be an important first step towards a peaceful political solution. Today, we met with our close partners, Ukraine and Georgia. We addressed the continued threat of Russian aggression, the deteriorating security situation in the Black Sea region, and NATO's strong political and practical support for both countries. NATO and allies are helping Ukraine boost its ability to defend itself. Self-defense is a right enshrined in the UN Charter, and allies are helping Ukraine to uphold that right, including with trainers and military equipment for the Ukrainian armed forces, cyber and intelligence expertise, and with significant financial support. We also discussed the presence of Russian forces in the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and the vote of the Russian Duma recommending the recognition of the non-government controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk. We all agree that would be a further blatant violation of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and of the Minsk agreements undermining the efforts to find a political solution in the Normandy format. Today, allies confirmed that NATO's door remains open. Any decision on NATO's membership is for NATO allies and aspirant countries to take, nobody else. The right of each nation to choose its own path is absolutely fundamental for European and transatlantic security, and it must be respected. NATO allies restated their strong support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of both Georgia and Ukraine. We cannot accept a return to an age of spheres of influence, where big powers bully, intimidate, or dictate to others. Sorry, there can be no decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine, and no decisions about Georgia without Georgia. We agreed that in times of tension, dialogue is even more important. NATO remains open to engaging with Russia in good faith. Allies are ready to sit down with Russia in the NATO-Russia Council, address a wide range of issues and find common ground. In the final session of our ministerial, we met with our close partners Finland, Sweden and the European Union. We share the same values, we face the same challenges, and the crisis in and around Ukraine affects us all. So we agree that it is even more important now that we continue to work together and complement each other's efforts to bring this crisis to a peaceful solution. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, we'll go to Wall Street Journal.
Thank you very much. Dan Michaels with the Wall Street Journal. Are you concerned, Mr. Secretary General, that comments, reports today out of Russia about hostilities around Donbass, firing and possible incursions could be used as a pretext for Russia to attack?
So we are concerned that Russia is trying to stage a pretext for an armed attack against Ukraine. It is still no clarity, no certainty about the Russian intentions. We don't know what will happen, but what we do know is that Russia has amassed the biggest force we have seen in Europe for decades in and around Ukraine. And we also know that there are many Russian intelligence officers operating in Ukraine. They are present in Donbass, and we have seen attempts to stage a pretext, false flag operations to provide an excuse for invading Ukraine. So, of course, this is of concern. I cannot go into the details of the different reports, but this is the reason why we are so closely monitoring what is going on, and also why NATO allies have exposed the Russian actions, the Russian plans, and the Russian efforts when it comes to disinformation. Because we believe that that makes it harder for them to act, harder for them to invade Ukraine, and we continue to call on Russia to de-escalate, to withdraw forces, and to engage in a political dialogue with NATO allies.
Okay, we'll go to BBC.
Thank you, Secretary General. I mean, you know, you've accused Russia of disinformation. I just wonder whether they could make the same charges at the NATO alliance. There were predictions, for example, that there might be an invasion on the 16th, which never happened. Russia has always said it's not intending to invade Ukraine, accepting that they've got more than 100,000 troops. Also, you're saying, you know, we're not clear as to how many troops there are. Are there 100,000, more than 100,000, 130,000, 170,000, 150,000 is the other figure. So I just wonder, is there a danger that, you know, in accusing Russia of disinformation, they can just turn to you and say, you've put out disinformation about coups that haven't happened, about false flag operations that haven't happened. How would you respond to that?
Partly by just referring to that what we have described are facts on the ground. And of course we have shared intelligence, we have shared information we have collected, but this is also information which is now available for everyone. It's something you can monitor by commercial satellites. So actually now no one is trying to deny the fact that Russia has a large force on the border of Ukraine. So that's publicly available information. What nobody knows, and we have been clear about that the whole time, is that we know their capacity, we know the forces they have amassed, but of course We don't know with certainty their intentions. But if we combine what we know about their forces, what we know about the threatening rhetoric, they have stated clearly that if we don't meet their demands, there will be military technical consequences. And we know the track record of Russia. They've used force against Ukraine before. If you combine that, and on top of that also put the fact that they have a lot of intelligence officers operating inside Ukraine, if you combine all of that, there is reason to be seriously concerned. And that's the reason why we are conveying so clearly that if they use force, it will have a high cost for Russia. That's why NATO allies provide support to Ukraine so they can defend themselves, and also why we have increased the presence of NATO troops in the east. All of this we do to try to prevent an attack on Ukraine. So the fact that we are describing a risk doesn't mean that we believe it would happen with 100% certainty. We describe that risk, that threat, also to prevent it from happening. So the main story, the main message has been the same from NATO for months. When NATO allies started in the fall, in last autumn, to describe the build-up, that was questioned. We also described the most likely plans that they will actually reach more than 100,000 troops. That was questioned. That has now happened. And now we need to prevent the next step from happening, that they're using this force against Ukraine. And that's exactly why we are doing all the things we are doing, in calling on Russia to de-escalate, in also sending a clear message about the high costs they have to pay if they use force again.
Okay, we'll go to the back, the National News Agency of Ukraine. Yeah.
Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Secretary General, according to the publicly available information coming from Ukraine, Russian troops are not withdrawing from Belarus and just maneuvering along the borders of Ukraine. So that my question is, do NATO share the Ukrainian concern that those troops could be staying in Belarus for constant base? And what would be a reaction of NATO if that happened? Thanks.
As I think what we have seen over many years now is a deterioration of the European security environment. With the illegal annexation of Crimea, with Russia's support to the separatists in Donbass, and now with the large number of combat-ready troops in and around Ukraine. And also, of course, the closer and closer integration of Russian and Belarusian forces. So that's exactly why we have reacted in the way we have in NATO. We have strengthened our presence in the east with a modest presence, with a defensive presence, with the battle groups in the eastern part of the alliance, in the Baltic countries and Poland. And that's also the reason why we now, in light of what has happened in and around Ukraine and the presence of Russian troops in Belarus, that we are now considering the next steps, including battle groups in Romania and in the southeast of the alliance. So NATO has to respond when we see aggressive actions by Russia, but we continue to strive for dialogue, for de-escalation, and we believe it is important to talk. NATO believes in diplomacy, we believe in dialogue, and therefore we continue to call on Russia to engage in good faith in dialogue with NATO.
We will go to Midday.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary General, can you tell us more about the meeting with the defense minister from Georgia? And we are waiting also NATO-Georgia exercises in March. And the second point, Mr. Zelensky today said Ukraine is welcome to NATO, yet not all members of the alliance. How would you respond to that? Thank you so much.
So we had a good meeting with both the defense minister from Georgia and Ukraine. I think in that meeting, allies expressed very strongly their support to both countries, their territorial integrity and sovereignty. And allies provide support to Georgia and Ukraine in different ways. We do it in the NATO framework. We provide bilateral support.
Was the NATO Secretary General. giving an update on the latest situation in Ukraine. Now it's time for one of my very special interviews with MPs where we go behind the politics, although there is quite a lot of politics in this one. I spoke to Andrew Rosindell, the Conservative MP for Romford. He gave us his reaction to the accusations against Prince Andrew, which the Prince has always denied, and talks about his love for country and animals too. So, your mum was a dinner lady. Do you class yourself as working class?
Do you know, Gloria, I've never thought of myself as any particular class. I suppose if I had to say anything, I probably would say that, because we didn't come from, my family didn't come from particularly wealthy backgrounds. My mother was a dinner lady, my dad was a tailor, and he was an officer in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War. So we're just an ordinary family, really. So I don't really categorise myself.
You know, you say you were ordinary, but you joined the Conservative Party at 14. That's not ordinary.
It's not, no. Politics always fascinated me. I always used to watch the news, even when I was like 10, 11. Didn't understand it, but something about it fascinated me. And I think it probably goes back to the Queen's Silver Jubilee in '77, when my parents took me to London and I stood in Fleet Street and I saw the Queen and the royal family, and something inside me made me feel deeply patriotic. And since then, I've always, really, my involvement in politics is more about love of country. And I think that's where it all stemmed from. And so I joined the party that I thought was the closest to my views. And I know I was 14, a bit young to get involved in politics, but I don't regret it. It was a great decision to make.
Are there periods that you have been an MP when you have questioned how conservative or how close to the conservative tradition your party has been?
There are times. The Conservative Party, like a lot of political parties, but particularly my party, seems to change, it evolves. It doesn't stick to one particular philosophy. I think it's a good thing to be pragmatic, but there are times when I wonder to myself, are we actually really conservative? Are we doing the things that I truly believe in? But I've never questioned my membership of the Conservative Party, even during the period when the Conservative Party were doing things that I really didn't like, particularly in being very pro the European Union. At certain stages it was, and even then I never questioned. I always thought we should stay in the party and fight for the kind of future that we wanted. But there are things I don't agree with, and I'm independently minded. I don't just read from the script, and I think we need more MPs that are like that, really.
You're a whip's nightmare, aren't you?
Do you know what? I think I am sometimes, but not always. I was actually a whip, believe it or not. For 2 years they made me a whip, and I think the whips have an important role to play because it's about managing the parliamentary party. You have to win votes to get legislation through, and it's about managing things and making sure things work well. But there are times when I'm a nightmare, but they know that if I believe in something, I don't give in, I stand by it. And so they do, I think they sort of respect the fact that if I make a clear stand, they're not going to be able to buy me off. And you talked about there being periods, you've never questioned your membership of the Conservative Party or anything like that, but there have been periods where you've questioned whether this is really conservative in its nature. Has there been a particular leader or period when you think, yeah, that period was a bit odd for me? Well, I was very upset when Mrs Thatcher was removed from office. I thought, I know some people wouldn't agree with everything she stood for, but she was someone of principle and she loved this country and she wanted the best for the country and she didn't care about being popular. She was there to do the job of being Prime Minister. So I was very unhappy then. And I was very unhappy at the drift that then followed under really John Major. We drifted, we then lost the election massively. And I felt disappointed a little bit in David Cameron. I thought he would be somebody that would take us forward. And he didn't really quite do it, did he? Let's be honest about it. And so we haven't really had the kind of Prime Minister. We've had good leaders. Michael Howard, I think, was a very good leader, but he never became Prime Minister. I actually think that Boris is my favourite leader since Margaret Thatcher. He'll be pleased to hear that, particularly in light of recent events. You mentioned the Queen's Silver Jubilee. You're a big believer in the royal family. Why? I think the royal family and the Queen, the monarchy, is above politics. We can disagree on political issues. We can have different religions, different backgrounds. Everything can divide us. The one thing that should never divide us is love of country. And the Queen has been a magnificent servant, not only of the United Kingdom, but of the Commonwealth. And I think that politics shouldn't be just about politicians. A political system, constitution, you sometimes need someone above politics. And in this country, we have someone who's above all of it and does the job so well. And it's also a constitutional thing, because at the end of the day, if you have somebody that is neutral politically, they can bind the country together through times of crisis and difficult periods, but also people don't dislike them. I mean, I know huge numbers of people in all political parties, especially in the Labour Party, who deeply patriotic and love the Queen. Not everybody is woke in the Labour Party, lots that aren't. Sadly, there are some that are. I know you're not, Gloria, but there are some that are. And I think it's very sad, because we can differ on, how much public spending and other environmental issues or whatever it might be. But the one thing I think should unite most people is love of country, and the Queen's sort of like the head of the British family. So I think the monarchy is a good thing.
Were you sad when Harry and Meghan left?
I was very disappointed, because when they got married, it was a wonderful royal wedding, and the nation celebrated for them. I don't understand what's happened. I really think Harry was a fantastic member of the royal family. He's so popular, and he really chimed with everybody. He was out there. People loved him. People adored him, actually. And yet, for him to, I don't know what's happened. He seems to have been taken away from the royal family, and I really think it's very sad. But they've made that decision, and now they've made that decision, they've got to accept the consequences of that. You can't be half in and half out of the royal family. So whilst they're still members of the Queen's family, I think they've chosen to opt out of their royal duties, and therefore they have to now live as ordinary citizens.
And being such a proud monarchist as you are, the Prince Andrew affair must have been very difficult for anybody who believes in the royal family.
I don't know what's gone on there. Clearly it's very difficult, and it's very upsetting for the Queen, especially in this year of the Queen's Jubilee. I want this year to be a wonderful year for the Queen. She deserves a fantastic celebration, and this is a distraction which the Queen didn't need. The country doesn't need it. So it is a private matter, really, for Prince Andrew to resolve, and I really hope it can be resolved very quickly, because I want to celebrate a wonderful year for the Queen as she reaches 70 years on the throne, and I think that's something we should be focusing on rather than issues such as the problems that Prince Andrew is facing.
Animal welfare is something that you're really passionate about. Why?
I just love animals, really love them. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm obsessed, because I'm realistic. Sometimes animals do need to be controlled a little bit sometimes, so I'm not completely all fluffy about animals, but I do love them and I want the best for them. I think we have a duty of care to all animals, whether it be domestic pets or animals in the wild, farm animals. I think we can do better than we've done in recent years, and that's why I'm promoting, have done for a long time, animal welfare in Parliament and new legislation in Parliament. I was Shadow Minister for Animal Welfare under David Cameron, and I did that job with passion. So I think we share this planet with the animal kingdom. We are not the only creatures that live on this planet. We share it with so many other different species, but we're in a privileged position. We control so much. So what we do affects the living world and the animal kingdom, and therefore I think we've got a duty towards them to make their lives the best possible it can be. And also conservation. So many animals become extinct, and I think we can do a lot more to protect the natural habitats to ensure that we don't lose any more of the magnificent animals that we're so privileged to share the world with.
If there was one law that you could introduce on animal welfare, I'm sure there are many, but if there's one priority which you could put on the statute book tomorrow, what would it be?
Well, funny enough, I'm promoting something at the moment. I've got a bill before Parliament, which I'm hoping does become law. It's actually reaching its final stages through the Commons, and that is to make it easier to fine people who do things that are cruel to animals or neglect the animals. It's fixed penalty notices. You know, when you get a parking ticket, you get a fixed penalty. At the moment, you can't do that if you neglect an animal, and sometimes a fixed penalty is better than taking someone to court if it's a minor offence or just a small thing that they've perhaps not done as they should. So my bill that's going through Parliament will make it so much easier to enforce a whole range of animal welfare laws. So I'm already onto it, Gloria.
Tell me about the political nature of your seat. When did you win that seat for the Conservatives?
Oh, right. So I won in 2001. It was the first Conservative gain, biggest swing to the Conservatives in the country in 2001. Mrs Thatcher came and campaigned for me 2 days before, and we were on the world's media. It was fantastic. It was a great election victory. Of course, it was the election that Conservatives were decimated in, the second election, Tony Blair's second victory.
That's right, yes.
So they didn't expect really to lose any seats, but my seat was an unusual result on the night. But I think it's not just because the Conservatives were particularly popular in my seat, because Labour had won it the time before. I think that I'm a little bit different than a lot of MPs. I am genuinely local. I'm from Romford. I was born there. I went to school there. I've lived there all my life. And I think that you'll understand that, having been an MP, that if you're from a constituency and you chime with the area, you go with the grain of the local community, I think that more people take to you and support you than if you're just a parachuted in candidate from central office, which I never was. And central office they've never put the strings on me. I've always been my own man in my own constituency. And therefore, I think winning that seat was a great victory, not just for the party, but also for the local area, that they wanted a local person to be their representative in the House of Commons.
And finally, you're a big Brexiteer. You are sat there with your Union Jack badge on. Some people stereotype big Brexiteers as people who do not care about any other country outside of Britain, sometimes even England. Are you an internationalist?
It's a fantastic question. I'm so glad you've asked that, because you couldn't get more of an internationalist than me. I have literally travelled around the world. I've helped people in countries around the world. I take huge interest in the Commonwealth, in the British Overseas Territories, and indeed with Europe. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1990, I set up a freedom training programme for young people around Europe to help them into democracy, to give them opportunities to learn about actually what is democracy, how does it work, how do political parties function. So I've always been a great internationalist. I fly the flag for Britain when I'm abroad, as I do today, but I love the fact that nations are all different. And I don't want everything to be, all conformity. I think actually having different nations with different cultures, traditions, languages, we should all get on well and be good to each other, be kind, respect difference. So I'm a big internationalist. I've been on the Foreign Affairs Committee the longest of any current Member of Parliament. I'm very proud of that. And I chair several all-party groups on different countries. So I think Britain's success is that we do reach out to the whole world, and we are an international country, and that's why global Britain very much fits with my beliefs.
Andrew Rosindell, upbeat, honest, interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots still to come. I'll be joined by the chief political photographer at the Press Association, who has snapped our leaders throughout the years. What can he tell us about them? First, it's the news with Rhiannon Jones.
It's 12:33. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. A rare red weather warning has been issued for South Wales and South East England ahead of Storm Eunice, which is due to hit the UK tonight. Thousands of homes in parts of northern England and Scotland are still without power after Storm Dudley hit the UK last night. Winds of more than 80 miles per hour caused power cuts and travel disruption. The NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has expressed his concern that Russia is trying to stage a pretext for an invasion of Ukraine. It's after claims that a Ukrainian village has been shelled by Russian-backed separatists from the occupied territory of Donbass. The Ukrainian foreign minister says a civilian building has been damaged. The separatists have accused Ukrainian government forces of opening fire on their territory 4 times in the past 24 hours. Local media are reporting that the victim of a shark attack in Australia was a British national. Friends say 35-year-old Simon Nellist was an experienced diver living in Sydney. It marks the first fatal shark attack in the city in nearly 60 years. Police have closed local beaches as they continue their search for the predator. Sex offender Paul Robson has been arrested in the Skegness area 4 days after going on the run from an open prison near Boston. Lincolnshire police say the 56-year-old is now in custody. Almost 15 million people were left waiting for post over the Christmas period. That's according to Citizens Advice. 2.5 million people missed important documents, health appointments, or were unable to pay a fine or bills. More than half of those surveyed went a week without their post. 18 charities supporting more than 500,000 people with weakened immune systems are calling for COVID testing to remain free of charge. There's speculation the government's Living with COVID strategy for England, published on Monday, will scrap the measure. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll have a full update for you at the top of the hour. It's back to the briefing with Gloria De Piero in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So earlier in the show, we were discussing the Red Wall and focusing on the areas of the country which went Tory for the first time in 2019. We've been going to those areas all week. We were due to speak to GB News correspondent Balvinder Sidhu from West Bromwich, but we were interrupted by the press conference from the NATO HQ. But I'm delighted to say Balvinder joins us now. Sorry about that, Balvinder. Talk us through the temperature in West Brom.
Well, yeah, this is was a Labour safe seat for almost 90 years, and it switched hands in the last general election in 2019. This seat turned blue for the first time in many decades. But, you know, the last time this seat was held by a Tory party was in 1931, and they came close in 1983 with just a few hundred votes separating them from Labour. But I've been gauging the mood here 2 years on. Has the alleged Partygate situation at Westminster affected people and how they feel about the Tories now? Are they still feeling that, you know, disappointed, or are they feeling hopeful because they have got us through the pandemic and the vaccine rollout has been commended by some? But this is what they had to say when I spoke to them earlier.
I was a Labour supporter, but I changed because I didn't like the way Gordon Brown took all the excess pension money out of the funds, and then he sold off our gold when it was its lowest price. There's more than a 50% chance that I would vote Tory next time, because I still think they're probably the best.
I would vote for Labour.
Okay. And how would you vote in a future general election?
Well, I'm debating now, because the way things are, you don't get no heart. To stop the immigration keep coming in, because we've got no room as it is now. So why should we support them when us poor people got nothing?
And so who do you think might support you with that, with what you feel?
Well, the way things are going on, I think it'd be Conservative, to be honest.
In another general election, how would you vote and why?
I'll still vote for Labour, for the same thing. Because, like what I said, Labour, always support different country, different people.
I used to vote Labour a good many years ago.
And then, how do you feel about the Conservatives now? Would you vote for them again?
You can say me again because I trust them. Simple.
They want Keir Starmer in, for a starter. So I think the Conservatives, I think they're doing a good job. I mean, I know there's been a bit of controversy, but yeah, I think they're doing a good job.
I wouldn't vote for Conservatives because they are PNP in Jamaica and they don't help the people the way they should do. So I wouldn't vote for them. But I always vote Labour.
So if I just tell you a little bit about West Bromwich, it sits within the Sandwell Local Authority, which is the 12th most disadvantaged local authority in this country. So this area is, one that needs, what I would say, a bit of TLC, tender loving care. I mean, they've had some investment in the town centre, in the development of a new square shopping centre, but they've also seen, a lot of deprivation. Manufacturing industry, the automotive industry, they've all moved. The jobs are few and far in between. The fortunes of West Brom have changed quite significantly over the years. And when I was speaking to people here yesterday, there were three types of people. There were those people who felt like the Tories had done a good job with the vaccine rollout and their handling of the pandemic and were willing to overlook the situation with these alleged parties. And then there were those people who were talking to me about the fact that they weren't allowed to go into hospital and say goodbye to their dying relatives and friends, and they weren't allowed to collectively grieve, in the pandemic because we weren't allowed to mix. And then there are the third type of people, which they would not speak to me on camera, but they said to me they're disillusioned with politics. They don't know which political party they would vote for. They don't want to vote anymore because they feel like they're all the same, and any future leader, they're all as bad as each other. So there were three types of people that I spoke to that, and the third type is probably the most interesting. So, here in West Bromwich, generally a very mixed response 2 years on from that general election. Things, in politics, things can change in a day these days with what's going on. So, it remains to be seen what the next 6 months look like, because this is an area that needs to benefit from some investment. Cost of living is an issue that is very pressing here. There is a lot of deprivation, and of course, energy bills are going to go up. So people here really want the government to be paying attention to this area. And this area doesn't feature much in that levelling up white paper we heard Michael Gove talking about just over a week ago.
Balvinda, really fascinating stuff. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us a taste of West Bromwich. Now, the cost of living crisis appears to be getting worse, with several new figures out this week. Private rents in the UK are rising at the fastest rate in 5 years. Add that to the new official data on inflation, which has accelerated to the highest level in 30 years, further squeezing living standards. Inflation is expected to peak at more than 7% in April, when the energy price cap will increase. Joining me now is Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson. Christine, hi, good to see you, particularly during recess. Thank you for your time.
It's all right.
Will you give the government some credit? Because figures this week also showed unemployment has fallen, and that predictions of soaring joblessness as we emerge from the pandemic, this just hasn't happened. Would you congratulate them?
Well, there's two sides to that, Gloria, because if you go out, like I have been during recess and before that, speaking to employers in my constituency, they cannot get the people that they now need to recover they're finding it difficult to find employees. So it's all very well for the government to say the unemployment's down, but we've got an employment gap. We've got important parts of the economy which can't be supported and serviced properly because the companies cannot get the employees. And that doesn't change the fact that people are facing a squeeze on their incomes, that actually wages in real terms have gone down against inflation. And, that means that families this winter, we've got storms. Heating is expensive. They're going to have to heat their homes through the snow this winter, and they're going to have to think about whether they can afford to do that and pay their family and feed their families. Now, that's not something that I ever envisaged that we would be talking about again in this country in the 21st century. So until the government addresses that, I will find it very difficult to give them any credit for the economy because they're getting it wrong. They're asleep at the wheel.
The Chancellor would say that he is providing support, £200 discounts on bills, £150 council tax rebate for those with properties in bands A to D. They've frozen fuel duty for more than a decade. They would say they're doing their bit to help.
Well, the average fuel bill we know is going to go up, more than £600, almost £700. And what he's talking about, and what the Chancellor's talking about in total, is about £350. That's not going to touch the sides of the problem for a lot of families. And it's a loan, Gloria. It's a loan. The discount on the council tax is one thing, but the rest of it's a loan that people are going to have to pay back. He's gambling with our money. He's gambling that the price of energy, that the price of gas specifically, is going to come down and that people will be able to afford to repay that. What if it goes up again? It's a gamble, and that's not good enough. What people need in this is security. They need to know that they're going to be able to heat their homes, feed their children. Pensioners, they removed the triple lock, and now pensioners are looking at massive inflation. The pensions won't keep up with that. How are they going to keep warm this winter? With their coats in the house? When did we become that country?
Finally, Christine, it's reported in the Financial Times today that Labour will only fight a minimal campaign in most of your party's top 30 target seats. Is there an informal pact that you anticipate with Labour at the next general election?
We will be fighting every seat at the next general election. There are 90 seats in this country in which we are second to the Conservatives. And we saw what happened in North Shropshire where we weren't second. And you also saw there that the Labour Party put up a fight in places like Oswestry. So, both ourselves and the Labour Party have, I think, a responsibility to our voters and to people who want to vote for us to get out there and do the best we can to represent them and win as many votes as we can in the general election. That is my position, and that is the party's position. We will be putting out candidates in every seat in the country.
Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat Treasury spokesperson, thank you very much indeed for your time today.
Very well.
Now, you've seen his pictures on the front pages of all the newspapers. He has followed Prime Ministers past and present around the world, snapping historic moments and sometimes making us laugh in the process. He has a unique knack in telling a story with a single photo. Today, we go through the lens of Stefan Russo, the chief political photographer at the Press Association, to see what a single moment can tell us about those who rule our country. I'm really excited about this, Stefan. I'm so pleased that you've come on the show. Can I start by asking you, when you started out as a photographer, did you expect your career to be defined by taking photographs of our Prime Ministers?
I didn't. When I started on the local paper over 30 years ago, photographing Christmas bazaars, summer fetes, diamond weddings, I never thought I'd end up travelling the world with the Prime Minister on his plane. I always hoped I would. I had a huge fascination in politics. I grew up in the 70s and 80s when there was so much politics going on. And I was always fascinated by it. And I always wanted to go into that area. But of course, these are dreams and you don't expect it. So, yeah, absolutely. It's been a great journey. And, I'm still enjoying it. And 20 years I've been travelling with the Prime Minister now, still enjoying it.
I know, I used to go on some of those trips with you when I was a journalist.
Indeed, you did.
How do you get the best pictures? Are Prime Ministers always accommodating? Do they get that you have to do your job and it's in their interest to be as accommodating as possible?
Yeah, some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them get it, some of them understand the importance of a strong image in a newspaper. and some of them, I don't think some of them don't agree with that, but some of them don't really care. You know, they'd rather do other things. They think other things are more important than their picture in the paper. And so, you know, if you go back when I started, actually I started with John Major in the early days when I started, only for a few years. He'd followed Mrs. Thatcher, who I gather my older colleagues say he was very good to photograph, knew the importance of a picture. You remember lots of famous images of her in the papers. John Major, not so, which was evident when I came to London. It was very difficult to get something interesting. But then, of course, Tony Blair came along, and he suddenly became the master of the photo op, you know, very polished. And he always, you know, you could tell he always wanted to make sure we got a good picture of him.
Let's take a look. So we've asked you to choose some of your favourites, one of each of the Prime Ministers, and we're going to start with Tony Blair. We can take a look of one of your pictures of Tony Blair. Why did you choose this one?
Well, I chose this. I'd obviously photographed him a lot over the years, but this is in Iraq in 2003. This is just when when the war was supposedly over in Iraq, when hostilities had finished. Remember, George Bush stood in the aircraft carrier saying, "Mission accomplished." And this Tony Blair was the first man. He made sure he was the first Western politician into Iraq in May 2003. And they very much wanted us to see that it was all safe, everyone was happy to see us. And this is a school in Basra. And we went into this school playground and all the kids were sort of trying to shake his hand. I'm not sure they even knew who he was, really. But, you know, everyone was very happy. And this little boy, he picked this little boy up and he planted this kiss on his cheek. And it was a great picture. I love this picture because it works. You know, you've got a little girl trying to hold his arm. Everybody around is smiling. But it just kind of summed up that day. And I'm not trying to do the government's PR for them, but, you know, I know for a fact they loved this picture. That's exactly what they were after that day.
Brilliant. Let's move on to Gordon Brown. Tell us why you chose this particular post.
Well, this picture, and again, I'd photographed Gordon Brown a lot and took a lot of good pictures, but this picture was during the campaign in 2010.
General election
2010. This was in Leeds at a health centre. And he was going to walk down this corridor. It was actually it was a long shot for TV cameras to get. And these doors kept closing on him. They were string loaded.
Doors,
yeah. So these two aides of his decided to hold the doors up. And I thought, what are they doing? So I quickly pulled back, quickly put a wider lens on and did the whole scene. And I didn't, you know, sometimes in a general election, I've done campaigns with you, you get a bit of cabin fever and you don't always see the picture. You know, if you've been on it for a month, you kind of just seen the same thing over and over again. And I didn't think much of this picture. And then people started seeing it, it went on the wire, and then I started getting phone calls, oh, wow, that picture, you know, and started asking me about it, and it just went crazy. And, you know, after that, I realised it's just a funny picture, and it made people laugh, and people still talk about it now.
Great. David Cameron. Why did you choose this particular picture of David Cameron?
Well, to even the balance out, because that was a slightly embarrassing picture of Gordon Brown. So here's a slightly embarrassing picture of David Cameron. Again, this is the election campaign 2015.
Right.
5 years later. And we'd campaigned a lot, and we'd been to a lot of schools. And he was trying to take part in a reading lesson with these children. And this little girl just kept banging her head on the desk.
Children.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, indeed. You know, don't work with them. And I did think, you know, it kind of serves him right. You know, they kind of go to these schools because they think it's a safe photo op.
Yeah.
You know, there's nobody who's going to give him a hard time on a high street. So he goes to these schools. And this little girl did this. And it just looks like, you know, she's had enough of the campus. She's just gone, oh, God, not another politician. And it just made everyone laugh.
It's making me laugh now. Love it. Right, and then we move to Theresa May. Let's have a look at the picture that you took of Theresa May and the one that you've selected.
Yeah, well, Theresa May, it wasn't that easy. Again, as I said earlier, some Prime Ministers not so keen to have their picture taken. She was one of them. I don't think she minded it, but she didn't enjoy it.
She didn't own it.
She didn't own it. She didn't embrace it. You know, I think she'd have been happy if we weren't there, you know. But we never got kept away, but, you know, she always felt a bit awkward, I think. And this was in Kenya. We'd been down to South Africa, and she'd been to the school. It was the first day of the big tour around Africa. And she started dancing. And everyone thought, oh, my God, what's she doing? And I rushed off the bus because we'd already got on the bus to leave, and I got this picture of her. And the next day it went really well in the papers. It played really well. All her aides, when I took the picture earlier in the week, were sort of head in the hand thinking, oh, no, what's she doing? But when they realised it played well, I thought, well, actually, we've got something there. So she, again, the following day, 2 days later maybe, we'd gone to Kenya, she danced again at this event we were at. And we couldn't stop her. She did it 3 times in the end. And this kind of defined her in a way. This kind of, suddenly she'd found herself, she'd opened up.
She did, she embraced it. She did it at the party conference, didn't she?
She did, yeah, when she came on to her speech, yeah.
And then let's move to the current day. You have chosen this picture of our current Prime Minister, which of course you took.
Yeah, no, this is when he was London Mayor. Now, he's been Prime Minister for 2.5 years now, and unfortunately for him, and obviously all of us, for 2 of those years we've been in a pandemic. So Prime Ministers haven't been travelling very much. It's been very difficult for us to see the politicians out and about because they haven't been able to go out and about. So I've picked this picture from when he was Mayor, and this is in Tokyo in Japan. It's a thing about street rugby. It was a promotional event they held the Rugby World Cup. And he takes it really seriously, this stuff. Boris is very competitive. You know, even, this is just basically a photo stunt, but he was kind of driving for the line. He kept doing this. And this little boy's only 6, and he flattened him, completely flattened him. And that sort of thing for any other politician would be a disaster.
But not for Boris Johnson.
It's a triumph, you know?
Wonderful. We've only got about 30 seconds left, but I just want to ask you, can a picture of a politician, can it ruin them? And I'm thinking here, Ed Miliband eating a bacon sandwich, David Miliband weirdly sort of waving a banana around. Can a bad picture do serious damage? A
lot of people say that bacon sandwich moment for Ed Miliband contributed to him losing that election. I don't think that. I mean, are we really making out that the public are so, trivial that they'll take that into account? So I'm not so sure. The banana, David Miliband, I didn't ever get that. I thought, why is that embarrassing? He's holding a banana at his lunch. So, yeah, maybe so, but certainly not those pictures.
Oh, Stefan, I hope you come back again. I've absolutely loved getting your insights and memories. It's been brilliant. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. I'm back every Monday to Thursday from noon. Isabel will be with you tomorrow at noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. For now, it is time for your weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. As we've been hearing on the news, Storm Eunice is approaching the UK. It's going to hit the country during Friday with potentially damaging gusts of wind and some snowfall. Storm Dudley's out of the way, but here comes Eunice brewing up down to the southwest, really intensifying over the next 12 hours before moving across the country during Friday. The strongest winds across England and Wales, but some snow likely across Scotland and Northern Ireland. A bit of snow still in the showers across northern Scotland today, but certainly for much of the eastern side of the UK today is just a bright and breezy day. The winds continuing to ease down after Storm Dudley. Quite a bit of cloud for Wales, Northern Ireland, the odd shower, quite mild in the south, 11 degrees on the south coast, across Scotland, northern England, 6 or 7 Celsius. But the action really starts tonight as we start to see this storm system moving in. Initially heavy rain coming into Wales, southwest England. Heavy rain for a time for Northern Ireland, but quickly turning to snow. So that is another cause for concern tonight as that snow moves in, and then we'll see some snow over the far north of England and southern Scotland. Temperatures holding up across the south, frost likely in northern Scotland before the winds pick up. And the winds are really the big issue with Storm Eunice as it moves in during Friday. The isobars pinching together there. So it's South Wales, southwest England that bears the brunt on Friday morning, but then strong winds for northwest England moving down across the Midlands into eastern England later on Friday. An amber warning in place covering most of England and Wales, a yellow warning for the snow further north. Those gusts of wind on the south, 80, 90, possibly around some coasts, maybe 100 miles an hour. Dangerous waves likely certainly to cause some issues with power and the transport network. The snow will continue on and off for much of the day across central and particularly eastern Scotland, so that could really build up through the day. That is another area for concern. Very windy as these showers move through. There'll be some afternoon sunshine and those winds slowly easing in the southwest later on. But serious weather conditions on the way. Keep up to date with the weather warnings on the Met Office website.